All right, welcome back into the one-man show that is Great Lakes Bonsai. Joining you in 2020 for the first time. Happy New Year to everybody. And being January, of course, we are in Zone 6A here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That means we're heading into our two coldest months of the year, January and February. So I've had a lot of questions from folks around what we do during the winter time with trees. How do we care for them? You know, do we just bring all of the trees indoors? Well, it's not quite that simple, so I'm going to try and break that down from a basic perspective and then talk about a couple of updates on material towards the end of the growing season. So I'll take you back in time to, say, October to take a look at how things ended up for this year. But before we dive into winter, dormancy, and some tree updates, just wanted to remind you that I'm an amateur bonsai practitioner, right? I'm only 3 years into the hobby, and while I've spent a lot of time on it, majority of my material is years off from being a finalized bonsai tree, right? When we talk about bonsai, we're talking about a finalized tree that has ramification, that has taper, that is in its final bonsai pot to illustrate the natural environment it would be growing in, and so that it looks like a fully matured tree. And a majority of my material is not that way. I'd say 95% has several years before it's ready to quote-unquote go to a show for presentation or be a finalized tree. So my goal with these videos is to take you along for the ride and try and illustrate the learnings that I'm walking through, and hopefully you learn a little bit on the way too. So with that said, why don't we go ahead and start off with some tree updates at the end of the growing season before we start talking about winter. So you can see this amber has lost most of its leaves. What it does have left is very beautiful, beautiful fall color. This is a tree I picked up at Meyer Gardens this spring for the bonsai show. I don't love this trunk. Up here we've got just straight taper, straight up. So I'm probably going to take this and cut it in the spring right here and try and develop a new trunk. And that's what's kind of fun about dormancy, is your trees actually have finished growing for the year, they lose their leaves, and then you can see the actual structure, branch structure included, and start to make some decisions on branches for spring. Okay, so a collected ash tree from this April has done very, very well this year. Again, a deciduous tree. It's already lost all of its leaves, as you can see. We collected this in April and it's done very, very well. We've got a couple extra trunks. We'll probably be taking this one off at some point. I do love this scar here and the way that it moves up to the right, so potentially thinking about taking this as a future trunk, doing some wiring, and taking it back this way. Okay, a beautiful, beautiful trident maple, my largest of the three. You note that the other two that I have are planted in the ground, one in the raised bed and one in the grow bed. This one is the one that we did this spring with root work. We did a trunk chop as well and just focused on this one branch, starting a new apex and thickening up that trunk long term. We're gonna place this back into the ground eventually, but for right now and maybe for another year, we're just gonna try and get it healthy. This coastal redwood, as you can see, is a good 3.5 feet high. We did top it this year, and we have some nice new growth coming in up top. It's doing very well, but when it gets to near, say, 40 degrees at night, this tree is in danger, right? In California, nights don't get typically lower than 35 degrees or so. So this coastal redwood needs to be protected for the winter. It really is beautiful, all of this new growth this year. We've been pruning it a little bit during the summer. Did quite well, and we'll be looking forward to making sure this baby stays safe for the winter. Ah, the Dawn, my favorite tree, not species, but of the trees that I actually own. I showed this a couple of times throughout the year. It did great this year. You can see it's starting to get some of the fall color. Pretty soon we're going to be able to start to see the structure that's been developed this year. If you recall, when I bought the tree this spring in April, it had really not much as far as branches go. So all of this vegetation now is brand new from this year. And that presents a lot of fun opportunities for us to prune when it does go into dormancy. Just absolutely love this tree. Can't wait to see what we do with it. Hey there, Marley. Okay, let's take you outside into the grow bed and finish up a few updates on material for this year. You see some oak trees there, and then a small Douglas fir, and finally our big trident maple that is suddenly as tall as I am.
It was about the size of that Douglas fir sitting next to it at the beginning of this season. It was planted on top of a tile to thicken up the trunk, and you can see the beautiful foliage as we come down the trunk here. Heading back to the raised beds portion of the garden, we take a look here at another successful season for a trident maple. This one is the second largest that I own. I did do root work on this tree, and I slip potted it into a larger pot. So we're just having that root base get healthy, add some branching, and then you see here we've got some decisions to make with cuts in the spring, and probably will be repotting or putting this tree back into the ground. As we move along the raised bed, we see a couple of small spruce seedlings that we have buried into the ground in their pots, getting them ready for winter and making sure they're insulated. And moving on down, we've got a couple of bald cypress. This will be their first winter here in Michigan, but they grew a lot this year. Those bases are thickening up nicely, and again, they're planted in the ground and ready for winter here. And finally, a couple of cuttings, a willow, a couple more spruce and pine seedlings, and my mugo pine there in the middle. That again has its pot fully planted and healed into the ground.
Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed those updates. Again, most of the trees are doing well. You notice we have several different grow environments for our trees. We've talked about this before, but we've got the grow bed, which is literally a cutout of the yard and trees planted in the ground. We've got the raised bed area, which was built this year and has those trees planted in the ground as well. And so trees planted in the ground, let's just start right there, right? We've already considered their cold hardiness, whether they can survive a Michigan winter, whether they need extra protection or not. All of those trees are cold hardy down to our zone at least, which is zone 6A. And that's the best environment for a tree to be in. It's planted in the ground, it's got the heat insulation from the ground, it's got the moisture retention in the large mass of soil that it's planted in, and it's gonna do fine for winter. So we don't have to worry so much about those trees when it comes to dormancy and when it comes to winter, because we're just gonna let them do their thing, sit outside, get natural rains, natural snows, and survive heading into spring. The next category we have is potted trees, right? And that's at this point about half of our trees. And so when we have a potted tree, it's already a little more susceptible to cold from what I've read. Evergreen Garden Works has a great website that'll walk you through cold hardiness and how to prepare for it. And I studied a lot from that site and learned about the different options that we have for those potted plants. So what can we actually do for these trees that are in pots and need to still be protected from the winter winds and cold temperatures? There are a few things we can do. First off, we can put the tree on top of the ground. Right there gives us about a 5-degree gain from the warmth of the earth that will help the tree be protected over winter. That's about the basic that you could do. You also want to protect from wind. So I have a raised bed garden, as you saw, and in the corner I have many of my trees planted. I also have a bench that's stood up on its side with some boards that's protecting them in that raised bed environment so that they're getting limited wind on the root system.
So a few weeks after the tree updates I showed you earlier, we started to get ready for winter. These trident maple cuttings and this large trident maple are going to be going into my unheated garage, and you see they have mulch around them here in the crates. We still will have to water them throughout the winter. And over here is a Chinese elm that I purchased recently. It is getting the same treatment. The pot is in a larger container and has mulch around it to protect it from winter, and it'll be going into an unheated garage as well. This shelter has about 8 trees grouped together with mulch in between them, and again is shielded from the winds. You can see my dawn redwood there in the front right hand corner. I've got an ash tree here that I collected last season. My oak is in the back, an amber maple in the foreground, and then over to our left is a beech tree that my girlfriend got me. We're going to style that into a literati style. And in the back, my crabapple. All safe and snug for winter. Over in the raised garden bed area, I do have a couple of trees. This is a maple tree that's been topped and beaten up by squirrels. They're always a problem. But the two that you see here are Pinus resinosa, red pines, and their pots are healed in for winter. Finally, in the other corner of our raised bed section, we've got some wind protection for a couple of Japanese maples and a Norway spruce, and you can see that the mulch has been applied to other trees in the raised beds themselves as well. So that covers our trees that need to be outside for the winter, go through a normal dormancy process, and how to protect them during that winter time frame. But let's talk a little bit about trees that need to be indoors for the winter. We start off with our tropicals. Here is a Ficus nerophilia and a cutting of this same tree on the right-hand side. And you can see that these trees are in a west-facing window with grow lights to supplement them throughout the winter. They're also placed on top of essentially a humidity tray with rocks so that the drainage can flow through and that we can water them consistently. You'll find that these ficus and other tropicals will kind of limp along unless you have a really expensive grow light setup. So these will be indoors until the days begin to get warm around 50 degrees. So the other kind of tropical tree that I have is a Ficus microcarpa. You can see the original tree on the right-hand side, and over here is a cutting of that tree. Both are doing well, and again, I do find that they grow a little bit in the winter, but certainly not as vigorous as during the summer. Similar setup here with grow lights to supplement them and facing a west window. And again, placed on top of a sort of humidity tray so that the drainage can get through and we can water them consistently. Okay, these are my coastal redwood cuttings underneath a grow light, simple grow light from Costco, and they're actually growing this season. So they were cut in June, took root, and now are extending under this grow light. I do mist them consistently and make sure to water them at least every other day. And you can see that there's a timer over there on the left. It's on about a 12 hours on, 12 hours off cycle for the winter. And finally, the grow setup for my largest coastal redwood and the mini one on the right. Underneath some LED shop lights and another supplemental grow light there that you see hanging. And same situation for my coastal redwoods, right? This is the third year I've had the large one. It seems to limp along during the winter, but the important thing is that it does survive. And we've got about a 1-inch truck on this coastal redwood. So a few more years before we can actually start to cut it back and shape it into its final bonsai form. Right now, we're just interested in keeping it alive over the winter seasons and getting that growth to thicken up the trunk during the summer. So far, so good. We will see if these survive long term. But again, the first few years, it does seem to be working quite well.
Okay, so hopefully we answered some questions for you today about winter dormancy, how to care for your trees, and showed you some examples. I'll show you a picture of the garden just the other day. It is, again, very cold, and these trees are sleeping, and we can't wait to get to spring so that we can start to do a lot of work on them. I will have a lot of videos coming out in 2020, wiring, trunk chops, repotting, all of that good fun stuff, because all of my material is starting to be ready to be worked on. And I can't wait to get going. So again, thank you to everybody who watches. Like and subscribe, comment if you want. Hope you have a good rest of your holiday break if you've got it. And we're over and out. Great Lakes Bonsai.